Most people walk away when they see blood on the sidewalk, but Naomi Carter stopped, and that single decision would change the life of the most feared man in New York. Rain hammered against the flickering neon lights outside St. Gabriel Medical Center as Naomi Carter pulled her thin waitress jacket tighter around her shoulders. It was nearly 1 a.m., and Brooklyn felt colder than usual, the kind of cold that slipped through fabric and settled deep into your bones. Naomi's feet ached after a 12-hour shift carrying trays and fake smiles for customers who rarely looked her in the eye long enough to remember her name. The tips in her apron pocket barely covered groceries for the week, and tomorrow morning she still had to pick up her mother's heart medication before rent was due again. She should have kept walking. She knew that later she would replay this moment 1,000 times and wonder what kind of person stops in the middle of a storm for a stranger lying half-conscious beside the emergency entrance. But Naomi had spent her whole life noticing pain other people ignored. The man was leaning against the brick wall beneath the hospital awning, rainwater dripping from his dark coat onto the pavement below. His breathing looked uneven, his face pale beneath the dim light overhead. People passed him without slowing down. A couple hurried by pretending not to see him. A cab driver glanced once and drove away. Nobody wanted trouble at 1 in the morning. Naomi hesitated only a second before rushing toward him. "Sir." Her voice came soft, careful. "Can you hear me?" The man slowly lifted his head. Dark eyes met hers for the briefest moment, sharp even through exhaustion, the kind of eyes that looked used to being obeyed. There was something expensive about him despite the condition he was in. His watch alone probably cost more than Naomi made in 6 months waiting tables at Romano's diner. But right now none of that mattered. What mattered was the red stain spreading through his white dress shirt beneath the open coat and the fact that his hands were trembling from blood loss and cold. "You need help," Naomi whispered. He tried to speak but winced instead, his jaw tightening as if even breathing irritated him. "No police," he muttered finally, voice rough like gravel dragged across concrete. Naomi froze. Every instinct told her to walk away. Men who whispered no police outside hospitals after midnight usually came attached to danger. The smart thing would have been leaving before whoever hurt him came back. But then she noticed something else. Fear. Not in his eyes. In his posture. In the way his shoulders stayed tense despite exhaustion, like a man waiting for the world to finish what it started. Naomi swallowed hard and slid under his arm carefully. "You're going inside anyway," she said quietly. "Argue with me later." The emergency room doors burst open under fluorescent light and noise. Nurses rushed past with rolling carts while televisions in the waiting room played muted late-night news. Naomi helped the stranger toward the desk, rain dripping onto the tile floor beneath them. "He needs help," she said breathlessly. The nurse behind the counter immediately called for assistance, but minutes later another problem surfaced. The man had a rare blood type. Supplies were critically low after a highway accident earlier that evening. Naomi listened as staff exchanged worried looks. Time mattered now. One nurse turned toward her. "Family member?" Naomi looked at the stranger. He barely remained conscious in the wheelchair beside her. No ring. No wallet visible. No one else had come for him. Completely alone. Naomi's chest tightened unexpectedly. "Yes," she lied softly. "I'm family." The word surprised even her. 20 minutes later Naomi sat beside a pale blue hospital curtain while blood flowed slowly through a tube from her arm. The room smelled like antiseptic and rain-soaked clothes. Across from her, the stranger finally opened his eyes fully. For the first time, he actually looked at her. Not through her like customers usually did. At her. Naomi offered a tired smile despite the dizziness creeping into her head. "You're gonna be okay," she whispered. The man stared silently before his gaze drifted toward the blood bag hanging between them. Something unreadable crossed his face then. Gratitude. Confusion. Maybe. Guilt. "Why would you do this for me?" he asked quietly. Naomi looked down at the red line connecting them both for one strange moment in time. Then she answered with the kind of honesty people only speak when they're exhausted enough to stop pretending. "Because nobody deserves to die alone." And somewhere deep behind those cold dark eyes, something shifted. Naomi woke to the sound of her alarm buzzing beside a cracked phone screen and the dull ache still pulsing through her arm from the blood donation the night before. Pale morning light leaked through the thin curtains of her tiny Brooklyn apartment, washing over peeling paint, second-hand furniture, and the stack of overdue bills sitting untouched on the kitchen counter. For a moment she forgot everything. Then she saw the hospital wristband still wrapped around her arm and remembered the stranger with the dark eyes who had looked at her like she had done something impossible. Her mother was already awake in the next room. Naomi could hear the soft rattle of coughing followed by the creak of old floorboards. "Baby, you are going to be late again," Patricia Carter called weakly from the kitchen. Naomi quickly pulled the blanket aside and stood, dizziness hitting her for half a second before fading. "I am up," she answered, forcing energy into her voice. The apartment smelled faintly of instant coffee and the peppermint oil her mother rubbed on her chest whenever her heart condition made breathing harder. Naomi shuffled into the kitchen wearing oversized sweatpants and an old sweatshirt from high school. Patricia sat wrapped in a blanket near the tiny table, her tired eyes immediately narrowing with concern. "What happened to your arm?" Naomi instinctively tugged her sleeve down. "Nothing. Just helped somebody at the hospital after work." Patricia stared at her daughter for a long moment, motherly intuition moving quietly beneath exhaustion. "Naomi Carter," she said softly, "you cannot keep saving everybody while forgetting yourself." Naomi smiled faintly and kissed her mother's forehead before reaching for the coffee pot. "I am still here, so I think I am doing okay." But the truth was she did not feel okay. She felt tired in the kind of way sleep could not fix. Tired of balancing rent notices against medication costs. Tired of smiling at customers who snapped fingers at her like she was invisible. Tired of pretending everything would eventually get easier. 2 hours later she stepped into Romano's diner beneath the sound of clattering dishes and impatient voices. The lunch rush had already started. Her manager, Rick Lawson, stood near the register with permanent irritation carved into his face. "Nice of you to show up," he muttered as Naomi tied her apron. "You look awful, by the way." "Good morning to you too," Naomi replied quietly. Rick glanced toward the dark bruise forming near the inside of her elbow. "What happened?" Naomi hesitated. "I donated blood." Rick scoffed immediately. "Of course you did." He shoved a tray toward her. "You cannot even afford your own bills, but somehow you still got enough kindness left to save strangers." Naomi said nothing because arguing wasted energy she did not have. The diner buzzed with lunchtime noise while cold November rain streaked down the windows outside. Customers barely looked at her while ordering eggs, burgers, black coffee, extra napkins. A businessman complained his fries were cold even though steam still rose from the plate. A woman in pearls left 50 cents on a $70 check and smiled like she had done Naomi a favor. By late afternoon her legs burned from exhaustion. During her break she slipped into the alley behind the diner for air, leaning against the brick wall while the city roared around her. She closed her eyes just for a second. Then she heard tires rolling slowly across wet pavement. Naomi opened her eyes as 3 black SUVs pulled to the curb beside the alley entrance one after another with silent precision. Expensive. Polished. Out of place in her neighborhood. Men in dark suits stepped out first, scanning the street with calm alertness that instantly tightened something in her chest. They were not police. They moved differently. Controlled. Sharp. Dangerous without raising their voices. Naomi straightened slowly as the back door of the final SUV opened. Italian leather shoes touched the pavement first. Then a tall figure emerged beneath the gray Brooklyn sky wearing a black wool coat perfectly tailored over broad shoulders. Even from several yards away his presence changed the atmosphere around him completely. The men beside him lowered their heads slightly as he stepped forward. Naomi felt her breath catch before she even saw his face clearly. Then he lifted his eyes toward her. Dark. Steady. Unforgettable. The stranger from the hospital had come back. The alley suddenly felt too small for the kind of power standing inside it. Naomi stared as the tall stranger stepped away from the black SUV, his polished shoes splashing lightly through rainwater while the men around him instinctively moved half a step behind. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The respect in their silence said enough. Naomi's pulse quickened as recognition settled fully into place. He looked completely different now than he had outside the hospital. Gone was the pale exhaustion and unsteady breathing. This version of him looked carved from control itself. His black coat fit perfectly across broad shoulders, dark hair neatly swept back, jaw sharp enough to cut glass beneath the gray afternoon light. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath for a second. Cold. Focused. Dangerous. The kind of eyes people obeyed without argument. And somehow they were locked entirely on her. Rick burst through the diner's back door carrying a trash bag before freezing mid-step. Naomi had never seen her manager lose color that fast. "Oh my God," he muttered under his breath. One of the suited men moved toward the alley entrance while another opened an umbrella above the stranger despite the rain already slowing to a drizzle. The stranger ignored all of it as he walked directly toward Naomi. Slow. Controlled. Intentional. Naomi instinctively straightened her wrinkled apron, suddenly aware of every cheap thread in her uniform and every tired shadow beneath her eyes. He stopped only a few feet away. Up close he seemed even taller than she remembered, carrying that same quiet intensity that made the air around him feel heavier somehow. For one long moment neither of them spoke. Then his gaze dropped. Briefly toward the fading hospital bracelet still tucked around her wrist beneath her sleeve. Something unreadable flickered across his expression. "Naomi Carter," he said finally, voice low and smooth with the faintest trace of New York Italian underneath. "You disappeared before I could thank you properly." Hearing her full name in his mouth made her stomach tighten. "You remembered me." One corner of his mouth moved almost like the beginning of a smile, but it vanished quickly. "I remember every person who saves my life." Behind him, Rick suddenly cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, if there is any problem with my employee, I assure you," the stranger lifted one hand slightly without even looking back. Rick fell silent immediately. Naomi noticed that. Everyone around this man seemed to stop moving the second he decided they should. The stranger looked at her again. "May we talk?" Naomi hesitated. Every survival instinct whispered caution. Men like him did not arrive with luxury SUVs and security teams just to say thank you. Men like him changed lives simply by noticing them. "I am working," she answered quietly. His eyes shifted toward the diner behind her, then back. "For how much an hour?" Naomi blinked at the bluntness of the question. $15 plus tips. A strange silence followed that answer. Not mocking. Not pitying. Worse somehow. Like he was trying to understand a world completely different from his own. One of the suited men stepped closer. "Boss, the meeting downtown starts in 40 minutes. Naomi caught the word instantly. "Boss." The stranger barely acknowledged him. His attention remained entirely on her. "I owe you a debt," he said calmly. "And I do not leave debts unpaid." Naomi folded her arms lightly against the cold breeze. "You do not owe me anything. I helped because you needed help." His gaze sharpened at that. "That is exactly why I owe you." Rick suddenly rushed forward carrying an umbrella from inside the diner. His hands trembled slightly as he held it over the stranger. "Mr. Moretti, please, let me know if there is anything the restaurant can provide." Naomi froze. "Moretti." She knew that name. Everybody in Brooklyn knew that name even if they pretended otherwise. Adrian Moretti. Real estate. Nightclubs. Restaurants. Rumors whispered late at night about power that reached far beyond legal businesses. Naomi slowly looked back at the man standing before her. The expensive coat. The armed security. The terrifying calm. Her blood suddenly ran cold. The stranger she had dragged into a hospital 2 nights ago was not just some injured man. He was Adrian Moretti. One of the most feared men in New York. And at that exact moment, Adrian Moretti looked at a tired black waitress with more focus than he had given anyone else all day. Naomi spent the rest of her shift trying not to look toward the front windows every 30 seconds. Adrian Moretti had left after only a few minutes, but his presence lingered inside Romano's diner long after the black SUVs disappeared into Brooklyn traffic. The atmosphere itself felt altered somehow. Quieter. Tighter. Even the customers seemed strangely subdued, as if danger had briefly walked through the room wearing an expensive coat and everyone had felt it without understanding why. Rick hovered nervously near the register all evening, wiping already clean counters while glancing at Naomi every few minutes like she had suddenly become something unpredictable. Finally, near closing time, he cornered her beside the coffee station. "What exactly did you do?" he whispered harshly. Naomi frowned. "What are you talking about?" Rick leaned closer. That was Adrian Moretti. She noticed the way he lowered his voice when saying the name, almost instinctively. Men like that do not just show up for no reason. Naomi stacked clean mugs slowly, pretending her hands were steadier than they felt. "I helped him at a hospital. That is all." Rick stared at her like he could not decide whether she was incredibly lucky or unbelievably foolish. "Listen to me carefully," he muttered. "Powerful men never forget 2 things. Respect and humiliation. If Moretti came back personally, it means you matter now." Naomi almost laughed at that. Matter. Nobody had looked at Naomi Carter and seen someone important in a very long time. She was a waitress who rationed groceries before payday and wore the same winter boots every year until the soles nearly split apart. Important people did not live in cramped apartments with sick mothers and overdue utility notices sitting unopened beside the microwave. But later that night, lying awake beneath the hum of the apartment radiator, she could not stop replaying Adrian's eyes when he said, "I owe you a debt." There had been no performance in it. No arrogance. Just certainty. As if repayment was not optional in his world. The next morning Naomi arrived at work early for the breakfast shift. Rain clouds still hung low over the city, turning the streets silver beneath weak sunlight. The diner smelled like bacon grease, burnt coffee, and fresh pancakes by 7 a.m. The normal rhythm of working-class Brooklyn slowly returned. Construction workers filled booths near the windows. Taxi drivers shouted sports arguments over scrambled eggs. Naomi almost convinced herself the strange encounter with Adrian Moretti had already passed like a dream. Then the lunch rush began. Around noon a wealthy couple entered the diner dressed like they belonged somewhere far more expensive. The woman wore oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy weather while the man spoke loudly into his phone before tossing his car keys onto the table with theatrical annoyance. Naomi approached with her notepad and polite smile already prepared. "Good afternoon. Can I start you with something to drink?" The woman looked Naomi up and down slowly before removing her sunglasses. "Do you have anyone else serving today?" Naomi blinked once. "I can help you with anything you need." The man sighed dramatically. "Babe, forget it. We are already here." Naomi ignored the comment and kept her voice calm. "Can I get you started with drinks?" "Water," the woman replied coldly. "And please make sure the glass is actually clean." Naomi nodded silently and walked away while the couple chuckled behind her. She had heard worse before. Much worse. Still, humiliation never became easier. It simply became quieter. 20 minutes later the couple complained about everything. The food temperature. The table placement. The speed of service. Naomi apologized professionally. Each time while exhaustion slowly settled behind her eyes. Finally, when she returned with the check, the man tossed several wrinkled dollar bills onto the table before leaning back in his chair with a smirk. That should cover your kind. The woman laughed softly beside him. Nearby conversations slowed. Naomi stared at the crumpled bills scattered across the tablecloth. Her cheeks burned hot beneath the restaurant lights. She bent down slowly to pick them up one by one, pretending not to notice the eyes watching her. And then the entire diner suddenly went silent. Naomi felt it before she saw it. The shift in the room. The stillness. She lifted her eyes toward the entrance. Adrian Moretti had just walked back into the diner. The sound inside Romano's diner faded into a heavy silence the second Adrian Moretti stepped through the front door. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. Even the cooks behind the kitchen window slowed their movements as if the entire building itself had suddenly become careful. Adrian walked forward without hurry, dark coat hanging perfectly against his broad frame while rainwater glistened faintly across the shoulders. Two men in tailored black suits remained near the entrance, scanning the room with cold alertness, but Adrian ignored everyone except Naomi. She was still bent slightly beside the wealthy couple's table, several wrinkled dollar bills clenched loosely in her hand. For one long second their eyes met across the crowded diner. Naomi felt her stomach tighten immediately. Adrian's expression did not change. That was somehow worse. No anger. No surprise. Just a terrifying stillness settling behind those dark eyes. The wealthy man leaned back confidently in his booth, completely unaware of the atmosphere shifting around him. What? He snapped toward Naomi. You expecting more? Adrian reached the table before Naomi could answer. Quietly. Smoothly. The kind of movement that made powerful men seem dangerous even standing perfectly still. He glanced once at the crumpled bills in Naomi's hand. Then at the couple seated in the booth. Is there a problem here? He asked calmly. The woman adjusted her designer purse and forced a polite smile. No problem at all. We are just finishing lunch. Adrian nodded once. Then why is she picking money off the floor? Silence. The man laughed awkwardly. Come on, it was a joke. Adrian looked at him fully now. The smile disappeared from the man's face almost instantly. Naomi noticed it immediately. Adrian did not raise his voice. Did not threaten. But something in his gaze made confidence collapse fast. Explain the joke to me, Adrian said softly. Nobody moved. The woman shifted uncomfortably beside her husband. Sir, we did not mean anything by it. Adrian slowly reached down and picked up the final dollar bill himself from beside the table leg. His expensive watch flashed briefly beneath the diner lights as he straightened again. Then he carefully smoothed the wrinkled bill flat between his fingers before placing it back onto the table. You embarrassed her publicly, he said. Now apologize publicly. The man scoffed nervously. Look, I do not know who you think you are. One of Adrian's security men took a single step forward. The entire diner froze. Adrian lifted one hand slightly without turning around. The guard immediately stopped moving. Controlled. Precise. Adrian kept his eyes on the man in the booth. You walked into this diner and looked down on a woman who works harder in one day than people like you work all month. His voice remained perfectly calm. The least you will do is show her respect. Naomi stood completely still beside him, heart pounding hard enough she could hear it in her ears. Nobody had ever defended her like this before. Not publicly. Not without wanting something in return. The wealthy man swallowed hard under the pressure of every eye in the diner now watching him. Finally he looked toward Naomi. "I apologize," he muttered quietly. Adrian tilted his head slightly. "She cannot hear you." The man's face reddened with humiliation. "I said I am sorry." Naomi stared at him in disbelief. Beside her, Adrian stepped back slightly, finally turning toward her again. The hardness in his expression softened by the smallest fraction. "Did you eat today?" he asked unexpectedly. Naomi blinked. "What? You look exhausted." The sudden gentleness in his voice after the cold authority moments earlier made her chest tighten unexpectedly. "I am fine," she answered softly. Adrian studied her face for a moment too long. Like he was noticing things nobody else ever bothered to see. The shadows beneath her eyes. The tiredness hidden behind professionalism. The way her hands still tightened slightly around those wrinkled bills. Then he reached into his coat pocket and placed a simple silver business card on the table beside her. No flashy logo. Just a name and a private number embossed in black lettering. Adrian Moretti. "If you ever need anything," he said quietly, "you call me directly." Naomi looked down at the card in silence. Around them the diner remained completely still. Because everybody in that room understood something Naomi herself was only beginning to realize. The most feared man in New York was looking at a tired black waitress like she mattered. For the next 3 days Naomi kept Adrian Moretti's silver business card hidden inside the pocket of her wallet behind old grocery receipts and bus tickets she could never quite afford to replace. She told herself she was not going to call him. Men like Adrian existed in a different universe from women like her. Wealthy people passed through her life the same way luxury cars passed through poor neighborhoods. Fast. Untouchable. Gone before you could fully process them. But somehow Adrian Moretti did not disappear. His presence lingered quietly around the edges of her life like a shadow she could not explain. On Thursday morning Naomi arrived home after work and found her mother sitting at the kitchen table staring at a stack of unopened medical bills with tears silently sliding down her cheeks. Patricia quickly wiped them away the second Naomi stepped inside. "It is nothing," she whispered automatically. Naomi's chest tightened. "Mom." Patricia finally slid one of the envelopes across the table with trembling fingers. The cardiology clinic had scheduled another procedure. Insurance covered part of it, but not enough. The remaining balance might as well have been $1 million to people like them. Naomi sat down slowly beside her mother while exhaustion settled heavily into her bones. "We will figure it out," she promised softly, even though she had no idea how. Patricia gave a tired smile that broke Naomi's heart a little more every time she saw it. "Baby, you have been figuring things out your whole life." Naomi looked away because hearing the truth out loud hurt differently. That evening she picked up an extra shift at the diner. By 9 p.m. her feet throbbed so badly she could barely feel her toes inside her worn shoes. The dinner rush moved fast beneath the glow of neon signs and coffee-stained menus while cold wind rattled against the windows outside. Naomi carried plates between crowded tables on pure exhaustion and routine until Rick suddenly rushed toward her from the register with an expression she had never seen before. Panic. "Naomi," he whispered urgently, "there are 2 men here asking for you." Her stomach tightened instantly. "What men?" Rick glanced nervously toward the front entrance. "Important men." Naomi followed his gaze and immediately recognized the dark tailored suit standing near the door. Adrian's men. Every instinct inside her screamed caution. One of them stepped forward respectfully the moment she approached. "Miss Carter," he said calmly, "Mr. Moretti would like a moment of your time." Several customers turned subtly toward the conversation. Naomi lowered her voice. "I am working." The man nodded once. "We understand. This will only take a minute." Naomi hesitated before following them outside into the cold Brooklyn night. A black SUV waited silently at the curb beneath the streetlights. Adrian stood beside it wearing a charcoal overcoat with one hand resting loosely in his pocket. The moment he saw her, his attention sharpened fully. Like the rest of the city disappeared. "You look tired," he said quietly. Naomi folded her arms against the cold wind. "That seems to be your favorite observation." Something almost amused flickered briefly across his face before fading. Adrian reached into the SUV and handed her a sealed envelope. "What is this?" she asked cautiously. "Open it." Naomi slowly pulled the papers free. Her breath caught instantly. Hospital statements. Procedure balances. Prescription invoices. Every outstanding medical bill connected to her mother's treatment stamped with one impossible word across the front. Paid. Naomi stared down at the documents in complete disbelief while the city noise faded around her. "You had no right," she whispered finally, voice shaking slightly. Adrian remained perfectly still beneath the streetlight glow. "You gave blood to a stranger without asking who he was. I think we are far beyond discussing rights." Naomi looked up sharply. "I did not help you for money." "I know." His answer came immediately. "Certain. That is why I helped her." Silence stretched between them while cold air curled through the street. Naomi's eyes burned unexpectedly. Nobody had ever solved a problem in her life before. Nobody had ever simply removed pain without asking for something in return. Adrian watched her quietly for a long moment before speaking again, his voice lower now. "The night you found me," he said softly, "everyone around me wanted something from me. Power. Loyalty. Fear." His dark eyes held hers completely. "You were the only person who wanted nothing." Naomi could not breathe for half a second after those words. Because somehow hearing gratitude from a man like Adrian Moretti felt heavier than hearing threats from anyone else. Naomi did not sleep much after that night outside the diner. Every time she closed her eyes she saw the hospital bills stamped paid in bold black letters and Adrian Moretti standing beneath the streetlight looking at her like kindness was something sacred instead of ordinary. It unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Men with power usually treated generosity like a transaction. Adrian treated it like a debt carved into stone. The next week passed strangely. Too quiet. Too smooth. Her mother's medication arrived on time without Naomi needing to calculate which bill could wait another month. The cardiology clinic suddenly offered Patricia an earlier appointment with one of the best specialists in Manhattan. Even Rick's attitude at the diner shifted completely. He stopped criticizing Naomi's schedule and started nervously asking if she needed longer breaks. People moved differently around her now. Carefully. Like Adrian's attention itself had become a kind of invisible protection. But protection came with questions Naomi could not ignore. Late Thursday evening she finally dialed the silver number printed on Adrian's business card. The line rang only once. "Naomi." His deep voice came immediately, calm and certain, as if he had been expecting her call all day. Her stomach tightened unexpectedly. "How did you know it was me?" A faint pause. "I did not give that number to anyone else." Silence settled briefly between them while traffic hummed softly outside her apartment window. Naomi stared down at the city lights below before speaking again. "I cannot keep accepting things from you. You are not accepting charity." "Then what is it?" Adrian's answer came lower this time. More honest. "Peace of mind." Naomi frowned slightly. "That does not even make sense." She heard the faint sound of a glass being set down somewhere on his side of the call. "It does to me." Something about the exhaustion hidden quietly beneath his controlled voice made her chest tighten. For the first time Naomi wondered what Adrian looked like when nobody else was around. Whether powerful men ever got tired of carrying entire worlds on their shoulders. "Have dinner with me tomorrow," Adrian said suddenly. Naomi blinked. "What?" "One dinner. No bodyguards at the table. No business. Just conversation." Her pulse quickened immediately. "Adrian, you are afraid of me." The statement came calm and matter-of-fact. Naomi leaned against the kitchen counter slowly. Should I not be? A long silence followed. When Adrian finally spoke again, his voice sounded quieter than she had ever heard it. Probably. That honesty surprised her more than any charm could have. Friday night Adrian sent a car for her at exactly 7 p.m. Naomi nearly refused 3 times before finally stepping inside the black sedan wearing the nicest dress she owned, a simple dark blue one she had bought years ago for church services and job interviews. Manhattan glittered outside the windows while the car climbed toward the Upper East Side, where old money and quiet power lived behind marble walls and private elevators. Adrian's penthouse overlooked the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling glass washed in gold evening light. Naomi froze slightly when she entered. The apartment looked less like a home and more like something from an architecture magazine. Marble floors. Dark wood. Expensive silence. Adrian stood near the windows wearing a black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. Without the overcoat and security team surrounding him, he somehow looked younger. Still dangerous. But more human. His dark eyes moved slowly over her as she stepped inside, and for one brief second he looked completely speechless. "You came," he said quietly. Naomi glanced around the penthouse nervously. "I am still deciding whether this is a good idea." Something faintly amused touched Adrian's expression before fading again. Dinner arrived already prepared by private staff who disappeared almost instantly afterward, leaving the massive dining room strangely intimate beneath soft chandelier light. Naomi noticed Adrian barely touched his food. Mostly he watched her instead. Not in a way that felt improper. In a way that felt careful. Curious. Like she was a language he had not learned yet. Finally Adrian reached into his pocket and placed something small on the table between them. Naomi stared in surprise. A silver ring. The same one she had noticed beside his hospital bed the night she saved him. "I wanted you to have it," Adrian said softly. Naomi looked up slowly. "Why?" Adrian held her gaze fully now. "Because I came back to offer you something more than repayment." The room fell completely still around them. Then Adrian Moretti spoke the words that made Naomi's heart stop for half a second. "I want you to stay in my life." Naomi stared across the penthouse dining table while Manhattan glittered behind Adrian Moretti like another universe. His quiet confession, "I want you to stay in my life," unsettled her more than any display of power ever could. Naomi insisted he barely knew her, but Adrian calmly answered that one night could reveal everything about a person, especially when nobody was watching. As the conversation deepened, Naomi finally noticed the exhaustion hidden beneath his controlled exterior. Adrian admitted men like him ruined people, yet confessed that for the first time in years he no longer felt numb around someone. He spoke about the night she found him outside the hospital, explaining that while others chased his money and influence, Naomi cared about his life before she even knew his name. Then he placed his father's silver ring into her trembling hand and quietly admitted he was asking her to hold on to it until he earned the right to ask for something more. 3 weeks later, Naomi stood beside Adrian at the Moretti Foundation Gala surrounded by New York's wealthiest elites beneath crystal chandeliers and golden light. Despite her elegant emerald dress, she still felt like the exhausted Brooklyn waitress she used to be. When an older businessman recognized her from Romano's diner and mockingly referred to her as a waitress, the ballroom fell silent. Adrian stepped beside Naomi, took her hand publicly, and warned the man to be careful how he used that word. Then, in front of the city's most powerful people, Adrian revealed that Naomi had once saved his life by donating blood to a stranger everyone else ignored. Finally, with reverence replacing every trace of coldness, Adrian returned the silver ring to Naomi's hand and admitted she had already changed his future long before he realized it.